Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MBM podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm super excited to be joined by Jess Dohnt, who is joining me all the way from Melbourne, Australia. So I'm super excited to have Jess on the podcast. She's my first Australian guest, and it was really amazing to chat with her. She has been a yoga teacher, a yoga studio owner, and a yoga studio manager. So she has lots of different things to share about her experience in the industry, the business side of yoga, creating a sustainable and plentiful career, and so much more. So we had a really amazing conversation that I'm super excited to share with you today. So without further ado, here's Jess. All right, I've got Jess Dohnt here with me today, and she is my first Australian guest. Jess, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
And I thought that a good place to start, this is where I usually start my interviews, is when you first got into yoga and what that was kind of like for you.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose I remember very specifically the first ever yoga class I walked into was a Bikram yoga class. And I think I was about 18 years old, so it's probably like just over 10 years ago. And I remember walking in, I got into yoga because I must have been reading in a magazine that Madonna did yoga. And I was like, well, if Madonna does yoga, I need to do yoga as well. So I walked into this Bikram class not knowing what to expect at all. I don't think I even knew that it was heated. So you can imagine my surprise to be in a room crammed full of people being bath instructions out and dripping in sweat. And I think I walked out and I was like, yeah, right. Madonna might just have to keep that yoga stuff and I'll maybe keep to what I'm doing. So, and I mean, back then, if you had told me now that I'd be where I am, I'd be like, you are kidding me. I am never walking into a yoga room ever again. So that was probably my first experience. And then for some reason, I kept coming back. I probably took a little bit of a break after that and then kept practicing here and there, you know, the occasional class I would go to, but never really got into a regular practice until I was always into, you know, running, high intensity stuff, boxing, like anything that kind of got my heart rate up, and I didn't have to think too much about really what was going on inside of my mind. And it wasn't until I left Australia and went travelling, would have been like 23, and we travelled around Europe for 9 months. I was with some girlfriends and I was going to, you know, I'd finished my business degree. I was like, I'm going to go to London, get a job, work in marketing, because that was, you know, what I thought my path was. And one of my girlfriends said to me, come, before you go settle down and get a job and pretend to be an adult, come and live in Canada for a few months. We'll do a ski season in Banff and you know, just like live with all the girls. It's going to be amazing. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be amazing. Let's go. So did that, was absolutely loved it, living the absolute dream. We were snowboarding, doing all of those things. And unfortunately, I was leaving, unfortunately or fortunately, now that I look back retrospectively, I was walking across the road, being an Australian that's not used to how slippery the icy conditions can get, didn't have sensible shoes on, and slipped up on the road, went, excuse the language, arse up and landed on my elbow and the bone popped out, straight out of the socket. So,
oh, God.
Yeah. Ended up in the emergency ward of the Banff Hospital, and later that, well, it was the evening, so the next day, surgery, plates, pins, you name it, in the arm, so that pull it back together again. So it started after that. So I think they kind of pulled everything out, and my arm was still very bent. They were like, the surgeon was like, look, that's probably the best that you're going to get it. These injuries don't have a very good success rate. The elbow joint, you know, it'll just be a slow recovery. Your arm one day might be straight again. And that sort of just wasn't, I just didn't want to accept that. So started doing a little bit of research about what to do, what would be the best modality of healing my arm and up popped yoga again. So my journey, like really into a regular practice, began as one of physical therapy. So to get back into, or to get mobility back into the joint in my arm or the elbow joint. And I, just due to where I was living, so after leaving Canada, was living in Belgium, in Ghent. And the only studio in Ghent at that time that was near me was a Bikram yoga studio, of all things. So back to Bikram, whether I liked it or not, I was being sucked back into that hot room. But the repetitive movement every day, and obviously the sequence and doing, there wasn't too much weight bearing on my arm in terms of downward dog and things like that. So slowly my arm became better and better and better. And so I received not only the physical benefits of the practice, but even just turning up and taking that time to breathe, to be in that hot, sweaty room. I started to see mental, emotional, all the other benefits as well. And funnily enough, like the path just kept on turning and twisting in my favour. I was in this small town and didn't know anyone. Was there with my ex-boyfriend boyfriend of the time, then ex now, and was going to language school. And I sat down in this language school, and I was just instantly drawn towards this girl. So I was like, she just looks really just drawn to someone, their energy. I was like, I just want to say hello, just want to be friends. Sat down and I was like, oh, what do you do? Blah, blah, blah. She's like, I'm a yoga teacher. And I was like, okay, something's going on here. It's one of those aha moments of maybe I should look a little more into this. So she was a Kundalini teacher, and she started these very small classes. She was Sri Lankan originally and was also in Ghent because her partner was Belgian. And so we created these classes of small people from our language school, from other people that we would meet, these classes. So I was doing Kundalini yoga and Bikram yoga, both completely different of the scales, but absolutely loved them both. And from there, was when I just started. I eventually then came back to Australia, and yoga just became a part of my everyday life ever since then.
Wow, that's amazing. What an incredible story. I always think it's really interesting to hear, because I feel like people come from all different like backgrounds and perspectives, but I always think it's really interesting to hear when somebody tries yoga and doesn't really love it for the first time, because I kind of had a similar experience, and minus the injury, our paths actually sound really similar because I got a business degree. I was working in marketing. I thought that that's what I was going to do. I debated London for a while, actually never ended up there.
Our paths could have crossed in a different way.
Yeah. As you were talking about Banff, I was like, oh, it's funny that you were just there like a couple years before me, I think. I was wondering if we have some sort of mutual connection there.
Seriously, we probably would.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, it's always interesting to hear that sort of thing. And so you started practicing more and more, and you kind of became like, okay, this is a regular part of my life now. At what point did you decide, okay, I want to teach this?
So and this is something that I still think about now, like on a regular basis, as you kind of go through the ups and downs of teaching, which I'm sure we'll get to a bit later. But when I came back to Australia, I suppose I still didn't really know that much about the practice. Like I really didn't know that much about yoga, even though I was going every day to a physical, like asana class. Like Bikram didn't really go into the classes I was going to didn't go into the philosophy of the practice. And the Kundalini was very different in another way that went into just focus more on the energetic level. So I was learning about that, but not really the like philosophy. I didn't really understand then of all the different disciplines that were out there and available. And so when I got home, by then I was like addicted to I loved the hot room of all things. I'd gone in a full circle and was loving it. So came back, tried a few different studios that were in my area, and there was one in particular, was great studio. It became like more of a social thing as well. Like got to know my friends became at the yoga studio. Couldn't wait to get there. It was more than about like the community and the practice, obviously. And they were offering a teacher training. And at that stage, I was still in a marketing job. And I remember like sitting there in my marketing job, and I just couldn't wait to finish so I could go to yoga, or it was like yoga in the morning, yoga at night. And so yoga was on my mind all the time. And so it was more about how can I get out of what I'm doing now and be more involved in that studio community kind of environment, and teaching was the most obvious kind of thing. So whether that's, I mean, who knows, right or wrong, but like I can't say I was ever like in the initial stages driven like I want to be a teacher. It was like how can I make this practice be part of this community my entire life or more of my life.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you found something there that you were kind of missing in other parts of your life. And then it's like, how can I do this all the time? Like, how can I get more of it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then,
and then like you jump onto you're on the teaching path, and you start to learn a lot really quickly about what it means to be a teacher and the whole part of the practice. And it really, like, my first teacher training was, so insightful and so challenging and all the rest of it. And you just learn all these things. I was like, I don't necessarily really enjoy being up here, like, you know, almost public speaking, you know, having all these eyes on me. And it was definitely interesting the first, you know, when I first started teaching. And then I think as I've kind of evolved now, I'm like, I just kind of learn and grow and continue to develop a love for teaching.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that I can definitely relate to that. And I know that I remember that being a conversation in my teacher training, like different people talking about, you know, like I don't want to teach, or I do want to teach, but I don't really like the idea of being in front of all these people, because everyone's kind of like they're hanging on your every word and they're staring at you for a lot of it. And it's one of those things that if you look back at them, you don't get much actual feedback in terms of how you're doing, which can be really challenging.
Totally. Like I love, you know, I would consider myself a people's person. So I was like, I'll be fine. Like I love being around people. But one thing that I've definitely learned is I love when people talk back to me and I'm not in a conversation with myself, which is what, like, initially when I was teaching, it was very much like that. Like I was talking and no one was talking back except for these spaces that sometimes look like everyone hates you in the room. But I mean, I was teaching hot yoga back then too. So a lot of the time it's just because they're sweltering in the heat. But it can be really like if someone was making that face in a conversation, you would be like, yeah, you're not having a good time or enjoying this interaction. So yeah, really challenging.
Yeah, definitely. If there's somebody out there listening who's kind of a newer teacher or just coming out of a teacher training, do you have any pieces of advice for kind of overcoming that?
I think the one thing that I kind of helped me a lot was the more and more I would speak to people, and it was always this thing like you kind of saw someone in class and you'd be like, and it's so just where the mind goes, you know, the faces on people, the expression on people's faces. I'm like, she must or he must absolutely hate me and I'm doing a terrible job. Like that's where my train of thought would go. And then afterwards, that same person could come up and be like, that was such an amazing class. Thank you. And it would just always leave me like bewildered. I'm like, I don't understand. And then I think it was one day that I was in class myself and I thought about my own facial expressions. And I was like, I'm not smiling at the teacher for 60 minutes. I'm not like giving her the thumbs up as she's walking around. Like I'm in my own body, in my own breath, and I'm sure my face isn't very attractive. Like I've probably got resting bitch face on, but I'm having a great time. And so I think that was maybe like a pivotal moment for me. Like, you know, just you can't really judge from someone's face alone what their actual experience is in their body.
Yeah, definitely. I had the almost exact same experience. I think it was like my second class that I ever taught. And there was this one girl who was giving me like, I felt like it was like a hateful face. Like, you suck was what her face was saying. And I was so new that I was like, oh God, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But I was just like doing my thing because I'm already thinking a lot. And then after, she's like, that class is amazing. Like I work at this gym. Do you want me to get you on the sub list? And I was like, what on earth?
It's so funny, isn't it? And it's just like, it's so, you know, like the more and more we learn about the human mind, and there's so many similarities between what we all think and how we kind of act and what we do. And it's like we're all focused on that one person that we think is like giving us death stares. And there's like, you know, that one person of 40 people in the room, there's 39 other people having a great time, not giving you, you know, those faces or anything. And all you can do is focus on that one person in the room that you think, you know, potentially isn't having a good time.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting. And I had the same thing too, where I caught myself the next time in class, like fully just like, my face is not nice at all. I'm like, oh, right. I'm that person.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's a learning curve for sure.
Yeah, it is. And then, you know, well, like sometimes, and I think now as well, I'm in class, and sometimes like your yoga practice, sometimes I'm genuinely not having a good time in class, but it's generally not got a lot to do with the teacher. Like it's more to do with like the way that my body feels on that day. It's more to do with my mind perhaps not being able to really kind of slow down and focus on what I'm doing on that day. And the teacher can be doing a really great job. But it's more of a personal thing of the reason why, like some days I just go to the mat and my body feels like a stack of potatoes that I'm trying to drag around, and that's my own experience. So I suppose that's another thing too, you know, you're just facilitating a space for people to go through whatever experience they need to go through. And if it's a bad experience, you kind of got to let them have it, because they can be the most insightful ones where you learn the most.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really, really good point. It's like we all go through different things. And sometimes I feel like you can feel the energy shift in a class based on different poses that you put people into and what people are going through. And I think that it's sometimes hard to not take it personally, but remembering that what your personal practice is like and that you go through those things as a practitioner as well.
Yeah. And you need to have that, like the good, the bad, the challenges, the postures that you love and you feel like a goddess in, and then postures that there is nothing goddess-like about you in them, and you're falling and getting frustrated. Like, you need both of those. And, it's hard it's a lot easier as a teacher to take people through the things that they like, but it's much more rewarding when you can take them through both, and they learn more that way too.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And so you've been teaching for a number of years now. Did you have a shift where you went from teaching kind of part-time with your marketing job on the side, or when you started teaching, did you quit your job right away?
So I was really lucky in that when I was, as I said, the studio that I was going to became like a second home for all of us. We were all really close, and there was quite a few of the students. We all went through teacher training together. And during that time, the studio expanded quite rapidly, and they were looking for a studio manager. So they put out an ad for a studio manager. I had a fairly good relationship with the director just from being in and around the studio all the time, and decided to go for the job. So as a new teacher, I was incredibly blessed and didn't realize it at the time. Was offered this job, and it wasn't the same as what I was doing. I decided to do a studio management role, which is a lot of admin, labor intensive, managing people, that sort of thing. So very different from what I was doing in marketing, but it was an opportunity to get out of the job that I didn't necessarily like. And as part of the studio manager role, I was guaranteed, or part of the role was to teach. I think at that stage it was maybe like 7 permanent classes during the week. So I was kind of just given that opportunity straight. I think I taught like my first class like maybe 2 days after graduating from teacher training.
Wow, that's amazing.
So yeah, really, really lucky. But I think it was one of those things where the stars just all aligned. Like, it was just, I think, right place, right time. There's a little bit of luck in that. Or, I mean, you could look at it and be like, there's a little bit of luck in that. You could look at it and be like, well, it was meant to be, in terms of, had looked at so many other teacher trainings as well, like going overseas and doing them and things like that, when I thought that was maybe something I wanted to do. And I'm really grateful that I ended up doing that one with the studio, because it meant that I walked straight into a job afterwards.
Yeah. That's something I've thought about, because I did like a 30-day intensive overseas. Like, I went to Bali to do mine.
Yeah.
And I found that it was a little bit challenging for me to find a job. And I mean, mind you, I also came back to like the Banff area, which is a very saturated market for yoga teachers, and not that many yoga studios. So I think that was part of the challenge, but I've thought a lot about that over the last couple of years being a teacher, and how I think that's one of the main advantages of doing a teacher training at a studio that you love, is that you kind of have that door cracked for you if it's not all the way open.
100%. So, and like, I can say that from experience in terms of, on the back end of being the studio manager as well. When we went to hire teachers, the director and I, it was a lot easier to hire, because I mean, so much of building this community in a studio is like, yes, what the teachers do on the mat and their knowledge and all the rest of it, but how they interrelate with students off the mat as well. Like, building that community kind of continues on with the care that they show when they're coming off the mat. And you can see how people interact with students when they're part of that studio environment as well. So when we were hiring, like, it would always come from within first, because they got the culture, they knew the students, they were already part of the community. And then we would look externally. And a lot of the time, because we knew, like, of all the teacher trainings in Melbourne and the ones that are overseas, we would kind of pick teachers based on, because we knew what they were learning from that teacher training. So other studios in Melbourne, we knew the kind of style that they would be teaching and what they would have learnt during that teacher training. And that was also really influential in the way that we hired as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear from a studio management perspective. And I've worked as a studio manager as well. And it's interesting being on the back end. I think it's actually a really great job to kind of learn the ins and outs of the business of yoga, because you see from sort of a studio manager's perspective, like, what they're looking for in a teacher and what considerations they're making when they're going to hire somebody, and kind of what they're looking for.
Absolutely. I couldn't be more grateful for the experience, because it's one of those things that, I don't know, like, sometimes it can be really intimidating being around senior teachers that have been teaching for a really long time, because you've been looking up to them for so long as a student. And being a studio manager meant that I was forced to make relationships with these people, really, like, people that I looked up to. And then you realize how human everybody is and how approachable everybody is. But it meant that I was able to build really good relationships with a lot of teachers in Melbourne really quickly, which I don't think I probably would have been able to do without having that studio manager title behind me.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's the studio that you're still a studio manager at, is that right?
No. So I was there for about 3 years. And just recently, so about, it's only been 6 months now, I think, maybe a little bit longer. Time kind of just goes so quickly. I'm not good with numbers and keeping up. I was kind of sitting on the edge of looking for maybe a bit of a change, wasn't sure. I loved where I was. I actually was starting to wanting to move out of the hot room. So it was just teaching in the hot room, practicing in the hot room was starting to have a bit of an effect on my health, to be completely honest. Like, I still love it, but just, hours and hours in that hot room, I was just getting so incredibly tired and drained, and I was like, I couldn't keep on going. So I was sort of looking to make a shift. And then I was approached by these two. So do you know of F45? Is that over in the, I think they're just about to open in the States.
Yeah, I've never heard it.
It's an Australian thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking in my head, I'm like, is this an Australian thing? It is. So it's like a high-intensity 45-minute workout thing that's like gone crazy over here. There's like one turning up on every corner. It's like a franchise. And so I started working out there as well. It was really fun, something a little different. And the two of the guys that own a few of the studios approached me and asked whether I'd be interested in going into business with them and opening a yoga studio. So they had found a property that they really liked and wanted to turn it into a yoga and Pilates space and needed somebody that had the kind of connections to find them the right yoga teachers and to set up a yoga studio, the management skills as well. So I decided to leave the studio that I'd been at for a while and opened my own space.
Yeah.
My own space with these two people. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Really, really lucky again. My name got passed through different avenues of people that had been working out there, and we got together. We all got on really well. I saw their vision. They understood my experience and thought that it would be a match. So we came together and we've opened a space called Remedy Yoga.
Oh, super cool.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of taken the transition from being primarily a studio manager and a teacher to having more of that like ownership side of it.
Yeah. So it's a new space and we've only been open 6 months now. And I would say my role is absolutely everything at this stage. So it's gone from like setting up, the hiring, the setting it out, the setting up of everything. I'm still teaching, but obviously not as much as I used to. The management, hiring, also permanent keeper of all the plants that we have in the student studio, which is a full-time job.
For sure.
And most of the time cleaning lady as well. So basically everything, which because we're in a new studio, we don't have the luxury of hiring like a full-time manager just yet. So my role is a little bit of column A, column B, and column C at the moment.
Yeah, wow. I feel like this is something I've heard from a number of different studio owners is you kind of, especially when you take on the role of opening a studio and you're not just coming into something that's already open, you kind of wear a lot of different hats. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, what that experience has been like and then how you manage that all as well?
Yeah, probably it's such a good time because I don't think I was managing it very well up until the last few weeks actually, because I had taken on too much and I've learned a very valuable lesson in the last few weeks that I am not Superwoman and not invincible. And even though I know better, I'm going to say, or have all the tools and techniques to keep stress at bay and to stay quite mindful and without anxiety, I must admit it caught up with me. The long hours, because, I mean, you know what it's like. The studio's open at 5:45 in the morning, 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and then they don't close until 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So they are incredibly long days if you're doing both ends, which I was for too long, and it just caught up with me. I got really sick. So I think, and we were supposed to speak last week, but I've just been unwell, unfortunately. So it's been a real learning curve of knowing that help was there. I just had to ask for it. And that's probably a personal thing rather than anything else. But you can't, in my experience, for myself, I can't do all of the things very efficiently and effectively. So now to manage that, it means that I've just stepped back from teaching a little bit more. If I'm there in the studio in the morning, I'll go home at night, keeping up a regular practice myself. So making sure that if I'm there at the studio, I'm jumping into classes as well and practicing. And building, I think it's really important for me because it's been my experience that building a really strong community at the studio as well. So getting to know absolutely everyone that walks in the door, making sure they're comfortable, and building that great relationship between our teachers as well.
Yeah. Wow. That's so much different stuff to manage. It's really interesting that you've gone through the process of kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, like maybe like hitting a peak with like reaching your limits and kind of being able to identify, okay, I can't keep going. Like I need to say no to some stuff. I need to pass some stuff off. And I don't think you're alone with that, because I've talked to a lot of different people who've owned studios and said, like, ask for help. That's one of their biggest things, is always ask for help, because help will come when you ask.
Yeah, 100%. It was there the whole time. For some reason, it's just a personal thing. Like if I look back retrospectively, I've probably made this mistake a few times in life in different situations, is that I think that I have to take everything on myself rather than just asking for help. And it's over the littlest stuff, like the littlest stuff. People don't mind doing it for you either. And it's little, like I'm talking little things like, do you mind popping downstairs and buying some toilet paper so I don't have to drive all the way in there to the studio, or little things like that. And it makes a massive difference, and people are so willing to help. So yeah, that's a massive thing.
Yeah, definitely. And then as you've watched the studio grow, do you feel like you've been able to like step back a little bit, or you've seen your role shift a little bit, or kind of what has that been like?
So a little bit, and it is still kind of evolving. I would say in my experience that the industry, and it's probably different in Canada and America too, but the industry in Melbourne has changed a lot in the last 12 months to 2 years. Studios were able to see a lot more success very quickly because there was less of them. Now there's almost a yoga studio on every corner, and everyone's offering intro offers for a month, or free stuff here and free stuff there. So it's very hard now to build a community, and you have to kind of find your unique voice that appeals to your kind of people. And so we went in initially, and this was, I mean, there's no fingers to point, it's just what we thought. We're in an area that's slightly out of the central city, or out of Melbourne City. And because there's some amazing yoga studios in Melbourne, all these like high-end luxe things. You feel like you're walking into a day spa. They're amazing. And so we've built something, it's like this sanctuary, if you will. You walk up the stairs and there's like trees everywhere, and it's beautiful, in an area that didn't have that. And so we were going for a feel that was very inner city, but we weren't in a city. We were out in the suburbs. So we had the wrong messaging in terms of our branding, in terms of not necessarily what we were offering. The offering was still the same. We still had the same great teachers and the great classes and everything, but it was like getting people in the door and breaking down some of the barriers. That was the biggest thing, breaking down the barriers, because people thought that yoga, like you had to, be super flexible and stand on your head, and assumed that we were bringing that same kind of inner city luxe, very that kind of yoga to the outer suburbs, and that didn't really work. So we've had to kind of rebrand a little bit, get our message more on key, and what we thought we could offer, it wasn't right for the clientele. So we've had to kind of come back and offer more of we're now a studio that is very much like beginners. So our teachers have had to tailor the way that they teach. And we're really about like breaking down barriers, like yoga is for everyone. We thought that like a vinyasa style class would be most popular because that's what we've been used to, and that's what was really popular in these inner city in the studios. And we found that yin, our clients love yin.
Interesting.
So yeah, really interesting. We've found that people want to come not really for the physical side of it. They want to come for the stress reduction and the relaxation side of things. So it means that we've just had to kind of shift what we do. And so once we shifted that, then we found that we had much more success, and it all kind of happened at the same time, which was great. That kind of shifted. I was able to take a bit of a step back. Other teachers were able to step up, which was great. But yeah, it took us walking away from, or like kind of shifting what we thought would work into, and listening to what people wanted around us.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That's such a powerful learning experience to have had. And it's interesting to hear you say that too, because so I think that a lot of the big cities in North America are very, very similar to that, where there's a yoga studio essentially on every corner. And I've watched, I guess you'd be familiar with Calgary, living in Banff. I lived in Calgary for a number of years, and then I moved away. And then it's like I haven't gone back to live, but I go back and I see the yoga industry changing there. Whereas when I was practicing yoga there in like 2012, 2013, there was not really any like quote unquote like trendy yoga studios. And now I could list probably like 5 or 6 of them that are all these like inner city kind of like hip, cool places to go practice yoga. And you know, I found that the same when I was in the US, and then I counter that with being in Canmore or Banff, and people do so many other activities. They really love their yin. They really love their restorative. And I taught at a yoga studio in Atlanta that didn't offer yin or restorative. And I was like, wow, this is such a different world. And it's so interesting how some stuff works some places and some stuff just doesn't work other places.
Absolutely. And I've found like working in the old studio that I was with for a few years, they had 3 different studios in different suburbs in Melbourne. And like the difference in suburbs that were less than 5 kilometres away from each other, completely different demographic. You know, a 6:30 a.m. class would work at one, but a 6:30 a.m. class would not work at the other one. It had to be like 6 a.m. or it wouldn't work. You know, 9:30 was like one of the most popular classes at one of these studios. We could not get anyone to come to a 9:30 class at the other studio. So it's so like what you think, well, in my experience, it's not one size fits all. Like you really have to listen to what people want in the area and kind of be open to molding your offerings to that, I think.
Yeah. And how did you go about actually figuring out what the people wanted? Like, was it really personal conversations with each student that walked through the door?
Yeah. Feedback. I mean, being around the studio all the time, you can see it in numbers. Like a class either works or it doesn't work. And if the numbers, and that's usually, I found there's usually a couple of indicating elements to that. It's either that people aren't clicking with the teacher, or the time doesn't work.
Okay. Yeah. Or I guess maybe the class at that time doesn't work as well. That's probably another one. Yeah, absolutely. Like
the class style at that time. And like we're going through that now at our studio too, like 6:30 p.m. or, 6 p.m., 6:30 p.m. in every studio that I've practiced and taught, and the ones that I've managed was always really popular, really full. Where we are, the 7:30 p.m. and 7:45 classes are really popular. Like it's later and later and later, and that could just be with the changing kind of pace of the world. People don't get out of work until later. They want to come to a practice after they've done, had dinner and all the rest of it. And it was, people wanting these later in the evening classes that are more yin, restorative meditation classes.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I guess too, maybe being in a suburb, I'm just thinking about like, I never lived inner city in Calgary. I kind of had like a 30-minute commute, and I went to a studio downtown. So it's like a 7 p.m. class wasn't very good for me because I got off work at like 4:30. So I'd go to like the 5 o'clock class because I could go straight after work. But if I was going to go later, I would go home first, have dinner, and then come back out. So I don't know, maybe just being in a suburb, it's like people need time to get home and do their thing before they go to yoga.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's always been like this in my experience. You look at the class numbers so intently when you're trying to figure out like patterns of what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes there is just no pattern. Like the class can be full and you're like, okay, this works. This definitely works. Oh, then you're like, what happened? What went differently? So sometimes and you know how life is just so up and down for everyone. Like there's stuff going on. Sometimes they're just is no pattern, and you just have to kind of get out there, talk to people, figure out what works. We send out feedback surveys all the time and really encourage our students to come and talk to us. We've got that kind of mentality that we communicate that we are a studio for our students and want to make the studio the perfect match of what they want. So always really open to feedback.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that it's really interesting to hear how, kind of what you guys set up wasn't necessarily the best thing for your community. And so tailoring what you offer. So I think a lot of people get an idea for their business in their head and then they're like, no, like I can't change anything. Like this is the business I'm running. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I think it shows a lot that you guys were able to look at that and be like, okay, we need to shift something to make it work for these people because it's about the community.
Absolutely. And it's scary. Like, don't get me wrong, it's so scary because you're like, well, hang on, this is what I know and this is what worked and this is what I was going to do. And you're kind of having to break away from that. And it's slow. Like, we're still kind of listening and learning. And I think we don't want to take away too many of the more dynamic classes because that's what we're used to, but we have to kind of listen to what people want. And that means, and it's also like, it's a personal thing. Like, I go to bed so early. Like, I don't really want to be teaching 7:45 p.m. classes because I don't get home till so late. So unfortunately, you have to listen to all the things that people want, and it's not easy, but yeah, you kind of have to listen and adapt.
Yeah,
and if
definitely.
it doesn't work, you can always go back. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, that's an amazing learning to have. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other, I guess, maybe like business specific lessons that you've kind of learned through your career as a studio manager and then now as a studio owner?
Managing people is one of the hardest things to do. And I don't think that's just yoga. People actually caught up with one of the store managers from Lululemon today. And the same thing, like, you can be a people's person, but it doesn't necessarily correlate or give you the skills to manage people. So that's been a big learning curve for me and I don't even know how to like communicate or how to do it right or wrong, but that's just been a really big learning curve on how to manage people effectively and efficiently. That would be a big one. Let me think. I didn't realize how unorganized I was until I became a studio manager. I think it's just, it's so different. Like, and working in a small business is very different from working in a larger or even medium-sized business. Like as you said before, you wear a lot of different hats, even as a studio manager, and you have to be quite willing to kind of go outside of the spectrum of what your job description might be, because you can, like small business, it's all hands on deck. Like everyone's kind of doing things to pick up the pieces and make it work efficiently. So, I mean, that's another thing. If you're quite, like the world is black and white and you're not willing to go outside of what the kind of job description is, it can be really, really difficult to stay and enjoy the manager as a role as a studio manager. I don't know, did you find that in your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I found that sometimes it was like the little things that the studio owner would ask. And I was like, oh, really? That's helpful to you? He's like, so helpful. Or even like the studio manager that I worked for, so there's 3 different studio managers. So studio owner that I worked for, there's 3 of us that do different things. And I've worked remotely basically the entire time that I've worked for him, which is, I think, really unique and kind of really different. But I was living in the town for a while, and his wife ended up having their baby 6 weeks early. And so he kind of like was like all hands on deck. Like, I need all my teachers to help. Like, who can sub for me? I need like the studio managers to essentially run the studio. Like, I cannot be there. And I was like, okay, what can I do? And he's like, we really need the cats to get fed. And I was like, what? Like that, like I'm capable of doing more. And he's like, if the cats don't get fed, like the cats die. Like, that is the most helpful thing you can do right now. I need you to go to my house, get yourself in, and feed the cats.
I love that.
It's like this
so
moment of realization where you're like, oh, it's like the little things that you can be so helpful with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. There's like, and then just the little things like the studio, the old studio that I was at, like I can't tell you, this is one of the things, like one of the major parts of my role. And retrospectively, I'm like, why didn't we we couldn't get it delivered because the delivery person wouldn't leave it unattended. But we went through so much toilet paper. Like I know that sounds ridiculous, but like so much toilet paper in a busy yoga studio. And so that when I first started, like that was one of the part of my roles to go buy toilet paper. And I know it sounds really bizarre, but to buy a lot of toilet paper is actually really difficult to like carry to your car and like put in, and not to mention like carrying it down the street, like all these like things of toilet paper, like people are going to look at you funny. And the first time I did it, I wasn't really like thinking logistically because like I've never bought that much toilet paper before. So I was like, yeah, put it in the trolley, like put it on the thing. This person at the cash register, like I was buying like 3 big 24 packs of toilet paper and tea light candles, which makes sense when you know what I'm doing. But like for the complete stranger to be like, what has this girl got planned for later? Just like all these toilet paper and tea light candles.
Up to something weird.
Yeah. So I made sure I did my shopping. Like I did my shopping run at like early in the morning or late at night after that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, I love that. And it's interesting too, like, I guess, you know, now as a studio owner, it's like, can you run down and get toilet paper? It's massive, massive help so that you don't have to go do it. But seeing that, being on the other side of it as a studio manager, you're like, I'm capable to do something more than like pick up toilet paper. And they're like, no, this is hugely helpful. It's probably interesting to see it on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. And so you have another project that you're working on, Cool Karma Collected. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. My as part of my teacher training, my first teacher training, we did a 8-week mindfulness course, MBSR, so mindfulness-based stress reduction, which was an additional 3 hours a week, I think, which was a course. And the teacher who taught Marika took us through those 8 weeks, and I found or had a profound shift in my mental health, the way that I looked at things after doing this course. So 8 weeks, like immersion into mindfulness, meditating every day, 45 minutes every day. So, I mean, as I said, I was doing like a Bikram hot practice and didn't really know I went into yoga teacher training quite, not ignorant, that's not the wrong word, but like I didn't know a lot. So I learned a lot, and this course was really transformational for me. So after I finished the course, Marika was also teaching at the studio where I was then the studio manager, and we started to build a little bit of a relationship. She studied or did her studies at the University of Massachusetts, so the mindfulness training there, and she was going back and forth overseas, like completing that training. And I was just fascinated, like I wanted to learn more. So we kind of buddied up, and I asked her whether she would be a mentor for me. And she said yes. We worked really well together, and she has a business called Cool Karma Collected. And then I started working for her recently in the last 12 months. So our main sort of line of business is she does these 8-week mindfulness immersion courses, MBSR, and then we get a lot of work in corporate businesses. So going in there and just talking to them about what is mindfulness, why is it going to help, how can it help, here are some tools to kind of assist you with reducing stress and dealing with anxiety and things like that instead of turning to medication.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah, it's been really, really rewarding. And like such a massive learning curve. Like you can go you teach this kind of stuff in a yoga studio and people are receptive. Like they're coming into you to learn either, meditation or yoga, and their minds are already quite open to what they're going to learn. But you go into a corporate business where people perhaps, still have this belief that at yoga we're all kind of like hippies casting voodoo spells and things like that, and you talk to them about meditation and they're like, what? So it's really challenging in another way, but you see amazing results from people who were not that way sort of inclined to or have no self-awareness or would never really sit still or are kind of dealing with high levels of stress and anxiety, and it kind of reconfirms that, this stuff actually does work.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I've never actually heard of that before, but I'm excited to check it out. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it's great.
And so how do you think that being a part of Cool Karma Collected has impacted your teaching or your studio ownership and that sort of thing?
Well, I would say it's influenced my teaching in a massive way, in that I've always sort of taught mindfulness in my classes. And so that's been a massive element of the way that I teach. It's the way that I practice. So it's definitely been influential. Then, I think mindfulness in a whole has had such a massive impact in my life in the way that, especially as a studio manager, things happen and it's very easy to react and overreact and maybe sometimes use your temper when you don't really need to. And mindfulness definitely taught me just to chill out a little bit in a good way and respond to things in a more kind of rational way rather than react. So it's been so incredibly helpful, not only in teaching, in what I've been able to share, but also just in my life, the way that I deal with people, the way that I deal with situations, the way that I'm able just to pause, to breathe, and then kind of go on with what I'm doing instead of getting myself into an absolute tangled mess.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. I would love to do that course as well to even add to it. But I found that that's what kept me coming back to yoga is off the mat. All of a sudden I'm in line at the grocery store and I'm not hyperventilating because I'm frustrated. I'm okay, there's nothing I can do about this situation. We'll just take a breath and wait patiently.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's really cool. And then are there any business lessons that you've learned from being a part of Cool Karma Collected?
Again, it's another small business. So you're kind of wearing all different hats, and we're pretty lucky. We kind of do consulting work, and then we've actually just been working on we just rebranded and about to relaunch our new website with a whole heap of meditations. All of our corporate clients will be able to, so when they come on and do the 8-week course, they can log in to the meditations and kind of track where they're at. So we've been working a lot on that stuff, which has been really interesting and learning so much, dealing with web designers and graphic designers and trying to figure out what we like and what we don't like and what languaging works. And again, just making this stuff really accessible for people with busy schedules, because 45 minutes to sit and meditate every day is a long time, and that's not accessible to everyone. So, trying to think of tools and techniques that can make this stuff a 10-minute 10 minutes here that can really help, or just trying to redesign things and make the programs that we run as accessible and as interesting as possible. So that's where a lot of our time has been spent lately. And it's a learning curve. Even when you think you're doing something right, you're not, you have to do it again. What works for one business doesn't work for another business. I've had to really pick up my graphic design skills. I learned how to use InDesign and Adobe, Photoshop a long time ago, and I've learned that Google is a really good tool for learning how to do these things again and again. So yeah, all of these things like a jack of all trades you really have to become and just kind of continuously learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that a lot. And I've kind of thought about how, I guess, like when you leave the corporate world where everything's very safe and you get a paycheck every 2 weeks and you get, you know, benefits and paid vacation time, it's kind of, I think a part of your mind can go, like when you're fully into that, can go like, oh, am I crazy for leaving that? But then I also think about like, I mean, I haven't updated my resume in a really long time, but if I was to update my resume, like I have so many skills that I've had to teach myself in order to be successful. And I think it's really cool when you can look at that and be like, wow, I've like self-taught all of this stuff because I had to in order to make money.
Absolutely. And I think there's not only like you're forced to do it, but in that as well, like something in your mind shifts and you're like, I'm actually capable of so much more than I ever gave myself credit to. And now if things come along my path, like before I may have looked at it with a little bit of resistance and been like, oh, I'm not the creative type. Like I don't have that. Now I'm like, yeah, there's this creative side that's come out of me that I never gave myself credit for. And now I really love that stuff. And I would never, if I had stayed in the confines of the corporate world, I perhaps would have never, ever have been open to welcoming those things in. Yeah. And I think that there's that, that shift in my mentality that's like, stuff that I probably would have been like, oh, no. Now I'm like, well, I'll give it a try. And I know that I can, like, I've taught myself heaps of other stuff. So maybe I can teach myself this too. And if I fail, I fail. I think that that's the biggest, like, mentality that I've learned. I'm like, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not meant to be. And every time something hasn't worked, I've got to say, I don't know whether I'm just really lucky, but something else, whether it's better or not, something else has always come out of it, whether it be a new person that I've met, a new experience, a new kind of direction on my path. Every time I think, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's going to happen and I'm not going to make any money and what are we going to do? This is all failing. Something else comes up.
Yeah. I've actually had a really similar experience to that. And I've wondered, you know, maybe it's just being like more open-minded and kind of, I don't know, to get kind of like yogic with it. Like you're opening your heart a little bit. And it's like when you're open, I think that people kind of enter your life a little bit more, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. It's very true. I think, well, I know I can only speak from my experience, but I definitely feel that. Like, I think my heart, mind, everything, body was just closed off to so much because that voice in my head had become so powerful of like, you're not good enough, you can't do that. And I think through like giving so many things a go, failing, you know, quite a few times along the way, you kind of just become, yeah, you can probably do that. Just give it a go anyway. Like just give it a try.
Yeah. I've thought a lot about over the last couple of years, because when you start delving into entrepreneurship, I feel like you hear more and more that you kind of have to fail to succeed. And I thought a lot about how as children or like as babies, it's like we fail in order to be able to walk. Like how many times when you watch a new baby, it's like they get up, they topple over, they get up again, they topple over, they get up, they take 2 steps, they tumble over. And they're never really like bothered by it. It doesn't seem like they might cry if they hurt themselves, but they still continue to get up until they can walk. And that's what I always try to tell myself when I'm in a situation where I'm like, I feel like I'm falling right now. And I'm like, it's okay. I can fall and I can get back up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like, I think every time you fall, like you learn, I don't know, you get back up, but you kind of get back up with a little more bounce in your step too. Like there's definitely things to learn every time that you fall down. And those things that you learn generally help you along the way, whether it's at that point in time or maybe later on down the track and you're like, oh, that's right. I needed to fall that time really hard and learn that skill for right now because now it's coming in really handy.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I want to be mindful of your time, but do you have any other pieces of advice or tips for anyone who's kind of new to the yoga world or thinking about starting their own yoga business?
I've probably got lots and nothing really useful is going to come to mind right now, unfortunately. But I think, you know, what somebody and I'm realizing this more and more now in my teaching, is that I look back on when I first started teaching, and I always compared myself to teachers that had been teaching for longer than me and wanted to be like them. It was always this thing, and it's done for years. I was like, I never wanted to be like Jess or teach like Jess, because I didn't even really know what that was. I always wanted to teach and be like somebody else. And now I look back on it and I'm like, God, you would have sounded so silly or like so fake if you had just like been where you were and owned where you were. It would have been probably a much more less stressful experience for you, and it would have been more authentic and probably more enjoyable for the students that were in the room as well. So, like, I suppose I know that it can be really hard to, when you first teach as well, because you're like, oh, am I saying this right? Like, I don't know if I'm doing a good job. But I think that there's something really endearing about that, like with teachers when they're new and they just kind of own exactly where they are, and I really love that. So, yes, that would be the biggest thing, you know, be exactly who you are, where you are, and try and stay as true to your own style of what you like to practice, and your students will find you.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good piece of advice. And I think that it's something I can certainly relate to when I first started teaching, is like finding your voice is kind of this awkward thing that you kind of just have to go through. And you'll find yourself like being a parrot for a while.
It's so awkward, isn't it? Like, and I don't want to put anyone off, but it's more of this like, I feel your pain. And like, I think for most of us, everyone's been through, it's like being a teenage boy and your voice breaking. Like, you just have to go through it, and then you'll end up with this really great voice on the other side if you kind of stay true to yourself and just know that you will find your voice if you just kind of stick with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you put that so well. I was going to compare it to like, kind of like using a new muscle. It's like anything you do for the first time, you're like, something about this just doesn't feel quite right. And I even found that like all of a sudden I would teach a new pose and I'd be like, oh, I'm saying this so awkwardly. Like, why is this coming out so awkward? Like, every other teacher says this fine. Why is it weird when I say it? And then I would just be like, okay, I've said it 3 times now. It's fine. I'm good.
Yeah. And then it becomes like second nature, and you're like, I remember the time that I would be so hesitant to teach this posture, and I'm like, I can't even remember why I was so hesitant. But yeah, it feels awkward. The first, when you're trying to find your voice, it's definitely an uncomfortable experience, but it does pass, I promise.
Yeah, definitely. It passes quickly too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So if people want to learn more about you, Jess, where can they go to find out more about your studio and what you're up to?
I know, must admit, this is probably a business skill that we didn't go into, thank God, but my social media is probably not, I've never been one to really love the social media, my own personal one, but definitely on Instagram you can find me, otherwise Remedy Yoga at the studio you can find me, and at coolkarmacollected.com.au when we get that up and running, so it should be really shortly.
Okay, amazing. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
So I hope that you all enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Jess is amazing. She's got so much insight into the world of yoga and taking care of yourself and sustainability and so much more. So you can find more information at www.mbomyoga.com. You can find the show notes there, and there you can find links to the newsletter, social media. You can join me on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. As always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.